New York, the glamorous city where the lights never go out, where the streets are always crowded and bustling. It's a place where businessmen in expensive suits stride briskly, luxury cars glide smoothly through the avenues, and towering skyscrapers glow brilliantly. But behind this dazzling facade lies a darker side, where laborers like Johnny struggle to make a living every single day. Johnny had no car, no office, no stable job with enviable benefits. His work was simple: riding his bicycle across the city, delivering small packages to customers. Whether it was rain or shine, freezing cold or scorching heat, he had to keep going. Stopping meant no money for rent or dinner that day. His old bicycle was Johnny's most valuable possession. It had carried him through the city streets, from rundown neighborhoods to the most luxurious high-rises. He had long become accustomed to weaving through the hurried crowds, dodging speeding cars and maneuvering around puddles left after the rain. But what he could never get used to was the contempt. One time Johnny arrived at a high-end apartment complex to make a delivery. Just as he stepped into the lobby, a security guard blocked his way. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to deliver a package." Johnny held up the bag, keeping a polite tone. "Use the back entrance." Johnny glanced toward the back of the building, a dark, grimy alleyway leading to the service entrance. No grand lobby, no gleaming elevators, only a narrow, damp staircase. He clenched his jaw but said nothing, quietly wheeling his bike around to the back. He was used to this. People like him weren't allowed through the front door. Johnny's days were never easy. He worked from morning to night, rarely taking a break. Sometimes he was so busy that he skipped lunch, gulping down a bottle of water before rushing to the next stop. But what exhausted him the most wasn't the hard work. It was being invisible. Most customers never looked him in the eye. They simply yanked the package from his hands and slammed the door shut. Some even cast disdainful glances at him, as if he were just another homeless man. But Johnny wasn't one to complain. He didn't blame life for being unfair, nor did he resent those who treated him poorly. He just hoped that one day things would change, that one day he wouldn't be just a struggling delivery worker anymore. But how? That Johnny had yet to figure out. Then on one sunny afternoon, something seemingly small happened, an event that would become the start of an extraordinary journey. That afternoon, New York was as lively as ever, but for Johnny, it felt like one of the longest days of his life. Orders kept coming nonstop, and his body ached from hours of pedaling through the crowded streets. When he received a delivery request for a luxury apartment complex, he hesitated for a moment. Places like that were rarely friendly to people like him. But work was work. Without further delay, he accepted the order and made his way to the address. As expected, Johnny wasn't allowed to use the main elevator for residents. Like always, he had to take the service lift, the designated route for delivery workers and janitors. Upon reaching the floor, he stepped out and walked toward the apartment listed on the receipt. Just then, the door in front of him swung open. A young woman stepped out, clutching a folder tightly, her face filled with disappointment. Before Johnny could process the situation, a deep, authoritative voice called out from inside the apartment. "I told you already, my company doesn't hire part-time students. Leave." A middle-aged man emerged from the doorway, draped in a luxurious robe, a wine glass in hand, his face filled with annoyance. The young woman, Emma, froze for a moment, as if still absorbing the sting of rejection. But in the end, she simply nodded, turned around and walked away, her gaze unintentionally meeting Johnny's as she passed by. Without saying a word, Johnny stepped forward, extending the package toward the man. "Your order, sir." Victor barely spared him a glance, accepting the bag without the slightest acknowledgement of who had brought it to him. But when Johnny spoke again, his voice calm yet respectful, Victor finally looked directly at him. "Excuse me, sir. I've been out delivering all day. May I use your restroom for a moment?" For a split second, Victor's expression changed, from indifference to mild irritation, then finally to a mocking smirk. "You think this is what? A public restroom? Get lost." Without a moment's hesitation, Victor slammed the door shut. Johnny stood there, his hands still frozen in midair from offering the package. A bitter feeling welled up inside him. He hadn't expected anything more than a simple refusal. But Victor's attitude, the way he saw Johnny as nothing more than a delivery tool made him feel like he had just been trampled on. With no other choice, Johnny took a deep breath, turned around, and walked away. What he didn't know was that Emma, the young woman who had just been rejected moments before him, had witnessed everything. She had just been dismissed by Victor simply because she was a poor student with no high-level work experience. And right after that, she saw Johnny being treated in the same way, perhaps even worse. She understood that feeling, the feeling of being rejected not because of your ability or character, but simply because you didn't hold a high enough position in society to deserve respect. She couldn't just turn away like she always had. She ran after Johnny, her clear voice echoing through the quiet hallway. "Excuse me." "Wait a second." Johnny stopped and turned around. Emma approached him, her eyes filled with sincerity. "If you need a restroom, you can come to my place. My apartment is just nearby." Johnny was momentarily taken aback. This girl didn't know him, yet she was willing to help a complete stranger. He hesitated for a second, but there was no trace of pity in Emma's eyes, only pure kindness, given with no conditions. So he nodded. That one small act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. Emma's apartment, a tiny space belonging to a communication student, was small but clean and warm. Johnny stepped inside, leaned his bicycle against the corner, and went to the restroom. When he came back, he saw that Emma had placed a meal on the table. "Here, have something to eat," she said, pushing the food toward him. Johnny looked at the meal, then at Emma. She wasn't wealthy, yet she was willing to share her only portion of food with a stranger. "I already ate," she smiled as if reading Johnny's thoughts. He hesitated for a moment, but eventually picked up the spoon and took a bite. The warm, simple meal didn't just fill his stomach, it touched a deep part of his heart. For the first time in what felt like forever, Johnny felt warmth inside. Emma sat across from him, watching him eat in silence. She wasn't rich, and her life was far from easy, but that never stopped her from helping others. "Thank you," Johnny said, his voice slightly choked with emotion. Emma just smiled. "It's nothing." That meal did more than just satisfy Johnny's hunger. It planted a new seed of belief inside him. Kindness was real, and sometimes even the smallest act of kindness could change a person's life. After meeting Emma, Johnny went back to his daily work, but something inside him had shifted. Victor's harsh words and Emma's unexpected kindness kept circling in his mind. Why were people like him, who worked tirelessly every day, looked down upon? Why was a job as important as delivery, one that ensured millions of people got their meals on time and kept businesses running smoothly, not given the respect it deserved? Those questions haunted him night after night. Johnny realized that if he didn't change his fate, he would be trapped in this endless cycle forever. Long, exhausting days, constant deliveries, disdainful looks, and doors slammed in his face. But how could he change? He had no degree, no connections, no business experience, but he had determination. From that day forward, whenever he wasn't making deliveries, Johnny spent all his free time learning about business and technology. By day, he pedaled across the city. By night, he sat with his old laptop, absorbing as much knowledge as he could. He studied existing delivery apps, analyzed how they worked, and identified their weaknesses. He realized that most companies prioritize profit over the well-being of the workers who kept the system running. An idea began to take shape, a fairer delivery platform where workers were treated as people, not machines. But making that idea a reality was far from easy. He needed funding. He needed a team. He needed help. Night after night, he pored over programming tutorials, learning how to build a mobile app from scratch. He wasn't a software engineer, but he believed that with enough determination, he could figure it out. He joined online forums, asked questions, and searched for people who could help him. At first, everything was incredibly difficult. No one cared about a poor delivery worker with an unrealistic idea, but Johnny didn't give up. He saved every penny he could and bought cheap online courses. He spent hours studying the market, learning about fundraising, and understanding how to run a company. And then, little by little, his dream started taking shape. He sketched out a model for an app, one where delivery workers were guaranteed fair treatment, healthcare support, and respect. But having an idea was one thing. The biggest problem was still money. How could he get funding? How could he convince anyone to invest in his dream? Johnny knew that the road ahead would be full of challenges, but he also knew that if he didn't change his own life, no one else would do it for him. And one day he would return, not as a poor delivery worker, but as someone who could help others like him. Because kindness, no matter how small, can be the beginning of something great. The years of struggling to make a living became the driving force behind Johnny's desire for change. He didn't want other delivery workers to suffer the same injustices he had endured. From long nights of relentless learning to nerve-wracking meetings with investors, Johnny's journey was anything but easy, but he never gave up. After years of perseverance, Johnny finally succeeded. He secured funding and launched his first delivery app, a platform designed not just for profit, but for the well-being of the workers who made it all possible. Right from its launch, the app sparked a revolution in the delivery industry. Unlike other platforms, where drivers were exploited with low wages and harsh working conditions, Johnny's company ensured fair treatment and dignity for every worker. Each driver on the platform received healthcare support, insurance, and, most importantly, no one was ever denied access to a restroom while on the job. Johnny would never forget the humiliation he felt that day, and he wanted to make sure no one else had to experience it again. That difference quickly attracted thousands of drivers to Johnny's platform. Before long, his app became a game changer in the industry. Drivers spread the word about a company that truly cared for them. Customers began noticing the professionalism and dedication of their delivery workers. And just like that, day by day, the company grew stronger. One morning, Johnny sat in his office, a simple yet modern space with large windows overlooking the city. Looking down at the bustling streets, he couldn't help but think back to the old days, when he was just another delivery worker in the crowd, pedaling through the freezing rain just to earn a few dollars. The phone on his desk rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Congratulations, Johnny! Your app just hit 1 million orders this month. We're breaking records." Johnny laughed, a mix of joy and deep emotion filling his chest. He had done it. His company wasn't just a financial success. It had changed the lives of thousands of drivers. The people who were once ignored and disrespected now had stable jobs, better lives, and most importantly, the respect they deserved. But for Johnny, this was just the beginning. He knew he could do even more. The streets Johnny once pedaled through were now the roads he looked down upon from the top floor of a skyscraper. From a struggling delivery worker, endlessly cycling through the city for urgent orders, Johnny had become the CEO of a billion-dollar company. No one had ever imagined that a delivery boy, with no degree, no connections, and no financial backing, could build such a powerful empire. But Johnny did it. And more importantly, he did it in a way no delivery company had ever done before, by putting people first. Since its launch, Johnny's app had only continued to grow, with policies ensuring driver benefits, insurance coverage, comfortable rest stops, and even partnerships with major retailers to guarantee restroom access for workers. The platform had ignited a revolution. At first, many investors were skeptical. It's too idealistic. If you give workers too many benefits, where will the profit come from? But Johnny knew something they didn't. A team that is respected will work with dedication and loyalty like never before. And in the end, reality proved him right. Company revenue skyrocketed, and more drivers joined the platform. Those who once struggled like Johnny now had better lives and a fairer working environment. The app expanded to major cities, surpassing even the biggest competitors in the market. Traditional delivery companies began to worry as their drivers left in droves to join Johnny's platform. Then one day, something happened that Johnny had never even dared to dream of. A major tech conglomerate offered to buy his company for over $2 billion. The board of directors was stunned. Investors began to whisper among themselves. Some advised Johnny to sell. This was his golden opportunity, his chance to enjoy the rewards of his hard work. But Johnny didn't waver. He hadn't built this company just to sell it for money. He built it because he believed it could change the lives of millions. And so, he refused. "I didn't create this company to make money for myself. I created it to change the lives of people like me." That statement instantly became iconic, spreading across social media and inspiring thousands of ordinary workers. People who once believed they would forever remain invisible in the vastness of the city. Johnny was no longer just a successful entrepreneur. He had become a legend. On the day his company went public, Johnny stood on the stage, holding the gavel that would mark a historic moment. Hundreds of investors, employees, and partners erupted into applause. Behind him, a massive screen displayed his company's stock ticker, now one of the most valuable delivery tech firms in the world. Johnny stepped off the stage, but he wasn't in a rush to celebrate. He had never been the type to be blinded by the spotlight. Instead, his mind was on one person. The next morning, Johnny sat in his office, gazing at the city through the large glass window. On his desk lay a folder, the guest list for the company's upcoming conference. He flipped through the pages, skimming over the names of investors, executives, and powerful figures in the finance world. But none of them mattered to him, because his mind was on a name that wasn't on that list. Emma, the girl from years ago, the struggling student who had once shared her only meal with him, expecting nothing in return. The only person who had treated him like a human being when the rest of the world had ignored him. Without hesitation, Johnny stood up, left his office, and told his driver to take him to the old apartment complex where Emma used to live. His heart pounded faster with every step up the familiar staircase. And as he stood before that door once more, he realized something. True success isn't just about numbers in a bank account. Success is when you can return and help those who once helped you. And for Johnny, it was time to do just that. Johnny stood in front of the old apartment complex, a strange mix of nostalgia and anticipation washing over him. The peeling walls, the worn-out wooden doors, the windows stained by time, it all looked exactly the same as the day he had left. But this time, he wasn't a struggling delivery worker anymore. Dressed in a sharp suit, stepping out of a luxury car, Johnny was now a successful businessman. Yet deep inside, he still remembered what it felt like to stand here years ago, with a battered bicycle and distant dreams. He clenched his fist, took a deep breath, and walked up the stairs. In front of the small apartment door, Johnny hesitated for a brief moment. Then he knocked. His heart beat faster than usual. A few seconds later, the door opened. Emma stood there, her gentle smile just as he remembered. But this time he noticed something different, a hint of exhaustion in her eyes. "Johnny," she gasped, disbelief written all over her face. Johnny smiled. "Hello, Emma." She looked him up and down, her eyes filled with unspoken questions. He was no longer the same man she had met years ago, with a worn-out jacket and weary face. Now he radiated the presence of a successful entrepreneur, but his eyes were still the same. Warm, honest, grateful. Emma invited him inside. The apartment was still modest, the same old wooden table, a few books neatly stacked on a shelf. But this time, Johnny noticed a stack of papers on the table. Job applications. "You're still living here?" Johnny asked, his gaze sweeping over the tiny space. Emma nodded with a small smile. "Still the same. I just graduated, but I haven't found the right job yet." Johnny fell silent for a moment. He wasn't surprised. Life in New York was never easy, and sometimes even a college degree wasn't enough to open the doors of opportunity. But Johnny hadn't come here just to reminisce. He had come to change Emma's life, just as she had once changed his. Johnny stood up, reached into his pocket, and placed a key on the table in front of Emma. She looked at him, confused. "What is this?" "A new apartment. For you." Johnny met her eyes, his voice firm yet warm. Emma froze. "Johnny, I can't accept this." Johnny gave a small smile. "Emma, you once shared your only meal with me without expecting anything in return. You helped a stranger when no one else would. I have never forgotten that. And now I want you to have a better life." Emma glanced at the key, then back at Johnny. She could feel the sincerity in his words. But Johnny wasn't finished yet. "I have one more thing to say." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I want you to work for my company." Emma blinked in surprise. "Doing what?" "Head of communications." Johnny tilted his head with a grin. "I need someone with heart and vision to help spread the values we stand for. And I can't think of anyone better than you." Emma was speechless. She had never imagined that the man she once helped just for a fleeting moment, would return one day and offer her such an incredible opportunity. She looked at Johnny, and this time, her eyes welled up. "Do you really believe I can do this?" Johnny nodded. "More than anyone." Emma looked at the key on the table, then at the man standing before her. He was no longer the struggling delivery worker from years ago. Before her stood a man who had fought through hardship, changed his fate, and yet had remained just as kind as he had always been. And she knew she couldn't refuse. She picked up the key and smiled. "Then I accept." New York was just as dazzling as ever, but Johnny was no longer a small part of it. He had become one of the most successful young entrepreneurs, featured on business magazine covers, invited to speak at major events, and, most importantly, he had revolutionized an entire industry. Today, Johnny was attending a major technology and startup conference, a place where the industry's most successful figures gathered, where investors sought the next big idea, and where struggling entrepreneurs tried to find a second chance. He was in the middle of a conversation when a hoarse voice called out behind him, "Johnny, can I speak with you for a moment?" Johnny turned around. Standing before him was Victor, the man who had once slammed the door in his face over a simple request to use the restroom. But today, Victor looked nothing like the arrogant man he had once been. His expensive robe was gone, replaced by a wrinkled suit. His once polished leather shoes were now worn and scuffed. But the biggest difference was in his eyes, no longer filled with arrogance, but instead with exhaustion, worry, and perhaps even shame. Johnny looked at Victor for a second, then nodded. "All right." They stepped away from the crowd into a quiet corner of the hall. Victor sighed as if speaking to Johnny was the hardest thing he had ever done. I don't know if you remember me, but..." Johnny cut him off with a faint smile. "Oh, I remember. You told me to get lost when I only asked to use the restroom." Victor lowered his head, his hands clenched together, a man struggling with his pride. "Johnny," Victor swallowed hard, "I've lost everything." Johnny wasn't surprised. He had already read about it in the news. Victor's once thriving real estate investment firm had gone bankrupt after a series of disastrous business decisions. Market fluctuations, risky investments, one by one, they had dragged him down. For a long time, he had fought to stay afloat. But when the banks came for their money and his partners abandoned him, there was no way out. Everything that had once made Victor powerful, his wealth, his status, his influence, was gone. "I was wrong," Victor admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "Back then, I didn't see you as anything. I thought I was better than you just because I had money and power. But now," he let out a hollow laugh, "now I'm the one looking for a job." Johnny studied him, a man who once stood at the top, now bowing his head, asking for a second chance. "So you came to me for a job?" Johnny asked. His tone wasn't mocking, just a simple question. Victor nodded slowly. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice unsteady. "I just need an opportunity. I have nothing left, but I still have experience. I still have skills. If there's a place for me in your company, I'll do anything." Johnny remained silent, observing Victor. If it had been years ago, Johnny might have felt triumphant. Maybe he would have taken revenge, making Victor feel the same humiliation he once endured. But Johnny was no longer that person. He had learned that kindness was not something to be traded. But he had also learned another lesson. Everyone must be accountable for how they treat others. Johnny met Victor's eyes and said a simple sentence, "I only hire people with kindness." Victor froze. He understood immediately. This wasn't revenge. This was a lesson. Not everyone deserves a second chance, especially when they haven't truly changed from within. Victor said nothing more. He simply nodded slowly, as if he had finally grasped the lesson that life was trying to teach him. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavier than ever. Johnny didn't watch him go. He knew that everyone has the chance to change. But first, they have to want to change, and that was something Victor still had to learn. Emma stepped out of her car, a simple yet elegant sedan. She had never cared for luxury, because to her, a person's worth wasn't measured by the car they drove or the house they lived in, but by what they did to help others. From a struggling college student Emma had now become the head of communications for Johnny's company, one of the fastest growing tech firms in the world. But despite how much her life had changed, her heart remained the same. Today, she had a special appointment. In front of her stood a homeless and unemployed support center, a project funded by Johnny's company to help those in need rebuild their lives. Emma walked in, smiling warmly as she saw dozens of people participating in soft skills training, resume writing workshops, and job search programs. A middle-aged woman hesitantly approached her, eyes filled with gratitude. "Ms. Emma, thank you. I found a job because of this program." Emma gently took the woman's hands. "I'm so happy to hear that." As she walked through the center, seeing the hope on people's faces, Emma thought back to herself years ago, a girl with nothing but kindness to give. Now she wasn't just receiving kindness, she was passing it on. Before leaving, Emma looked up at the sky above New York, the same sky she and Johnny had once dreamed under when they had nothing. She knew that kindness is never wasted. It spreads from one person to another like an endless ripple, and she would continue that mission, always. Kindness. The power of small acts. Kindness is an invisible force. It doesn't boast, it doesn't make noise, but it has the power to change destinies. Johnny's story is proof of that. A small act of kindness from Emma, a warm meal and a genuine smile, became the light that guided his path. No one can predict the future. A poor worker today could become a CEO. A man at the top could lose everything. Victor was once wealthy, but arrogance led to his downfall. Johnny was once overlooked, but a moment of kindness helped him rise. With power, Johnny could have sought revenge, but he didn't. He understood that someone without kindness will never truly change, no matter how many chances they are given. Success isn't just about wealth, it's about how we treat others. Emma didn't help Johnny expecting anything in return, but her kindness set off a ripple effect, creating a fair delivery system that changed thousands of lives. Kindness is like a spark. Once ignited, it spreads from one person to another. Life is a long journey. You never know who someone will become in the future. But one thing is certain, kindness is never wasted. It only waits for the right time to come back to you in ways you never expected.